What's up, guys, and welcome back to another project where we are going to create animated navbar. Okay, we are going to create an animated navbar menu using only CSS keyframes. Okay, so in the previous video we created a responsive navbar, as you can see here. So this is a finished project. This one we ended up in the previous video. So I'm going to leave a link to this. Okay, if you want to create this responsive navbar that we have here, and this is a multi-page website, a very simple website that we created in the last video. And in this video I think it will be more fun if we have some animation for this navbar. Okay, we can just have this pop up like that. Okay, so we are going to add some animations. We are actually going to create 5 different animations. So I'm just going to go ahead and then show you a preview of the animations that this project is going to end up with. Okay, so this is going to be our first animation. This is going to be our second one. We have our third one, our fourth animation, and finally we are going to have our last animation, which is the fifth one. Okay, and we are going to use only CSS keyframes for this project. Okay, for this animation. Right, so that's all. Let's get right in and then give this a beautiful animation. Okay, so here in our projects, after the nav links li, in the responsive design, okay, in the media queries, I'm going to have a very long space here. Okay, just so we can have some space for the animations. All right, so we are going to have our first animation. So let me just say animation 1. Okay, all right, so we are going to have our CSS keyframes for our first animation. Let me shrink this a little bit. All right, so as keyframes, and I'm going to call this animation 1. Okay, that's the name of our keyframes, and this is going to go to, okay, or you can do 100%, and that's just defining the end state of this keyframe. Okay, so 2. What I'm going to do at the end is transform and rotate each li. Okay, we are going to put this keyframe on the li's, so I want to transform them, rotate them to 0 degrees. Okay, I'm going to rotate them to 0 degrees. All right, now in the beginning, okay, or at the start of the animation, I'm actually going to copy this li. That's what we are going to put our animation on, and I'm separating that from this because we are eventually going to comment this whole thing out. Okay, we are going to have 5 different animations. Okay, so we are going to comment this out. All right, so initially I want this to have a transform rotate on the z-axis. Okay, we are first going to rotate on the z-axis, so we can just do rotate. Okay, since by default we rotate on the z-axis. Okay, so initially we are going to let me actually show this so that you see what's happening. So initially we are going to have a rotation of negative 90 degrees on the z-axis. So this is how it is going to look like. Okay, it's going to rotate like this on the z-axis. And let's actually change the transform origin. Okay, so transform origin, we are going to give that top right. So that's where our rotation is going to, that's going to be the pinpoint or the pivot of our rotation, right? So I'm going to add the keyframe. Okay, so I'm going to do animation. The name of the keyframe is animation 1. Okay, and this is going to take, let's do 1 second. So it's going to, the duration of the animation is going to be 1 second, and I'm going to give it an easing function of ease, and I'm going to set the fill mode to forwards. Okay, and this forwards is just going to make sure the end state of the animation is saved, okay, or the animation stays at the end state that we have here. Okay, so if you don't have this forwards, let's see what happens. It goes back to the initial state. Okay, but if we have the forwards, then we have the end state. Okay, and as I said, this transform origin just changes the pivots or the rotation points of the item that we are trying to animate. Okay, animation is pretty difficult to explain. It's more it's a visual thing, so I think you can follow along. Right, so this is what we have so far, and this actually doesn't look bad. Okay, but I want it to look more interesting. So what we are going to do is, initially we are going to actually, you know what, let's give it a rotation on the y-axis as well, a rotation of 90 degrees. Okay, so initially this is how it's going to look. Okay, and for this to look a little more like a 3D animation, let's go to the parent of what we are trying to animate. Okay, so we are animating the li, so the parent of that is going to be the ul. Okay, so we are going to add a perspective of, let's do 350 pixels. Okay, so this perspective is basically an illusion of how close we are to the animation. Okay, so let's see. So it looks a little more like a 3D animation. Okay, which is really cool. Now I don't want all these to come in at once. Okay, and I actually want to change the pivot point for each of these animations or each of these LIs. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, and we are going to use the pseudo selector. That's the nth child pseudo selector to select the second element. That's the about, the second li. And what I'm going to do here is to give it a delay. Okay, so animation delay, I'm going to give it a delay of 300 milliseconds. Okay, I'm going to delay that by 300 milliseconds, and as you saw, it took a while before it animated. Okay, it started the animation, and I'm actually going to change the pivot point for this as well. Okay, so as you can see, they all have the pivot point on the top right. Okay, but I want this one to be on the top left. All right, so that's the transform origin. I'm going to change that to top left. Let's see what happens. And this is weird now because it is basically animating on the opposite direction or in the opposite direction. So what I'm going to do is to change the initial rotation as well. Okay, so initially this is going to rotate on the z-axis. Let me actually be specific here. On the z-axis is going to be 90 degrees, and on the y-axis this time is going to be negative 90 degrees. So let's see what happens. Okay, so we have that. Okay, we have a more interesting look. All right, now it doesn't really look good because initially we see it on the left side looking weird, and then it pops up in, or it start animating in. Okay, so initially I want to give all these elements an opacity of 0. Okay, since we have an initial opacity of 0, the end should have an opacity of 1. Okay, right now it looks a little better. Okay, all right, so what I'm going to do is to get all the elements and then have some different styles on them. Okay, so there's going to have a pivot point on the top left as we've already done, and it is going to have a different rotation or transform, and we are going to do same for this. So basically the even ones are going to have this style. Okay, and the odd ones, that is the home, services, and then the contacts, are going to have these styles. Okay, so I'm going to get the I'm going to get so we have this the second one. Let's get the third one, and that's going to have basically the same as the first, but it is going to have a different animation delay. Okay, so let's give that an animation delay of 600 milliseconds. Okay, so we do that, and we have that. Okay, let's do same for the fourth element. So let's grab that, and it's going to have 900 milliseconds for the animation delay. Is going to have these styles as the second one. Okay, so let's save, and we have that as well. Okay, now let's do same for the last element. That is the fifth element. That's going to have 1200 milliseconds delay. Okay, we can actually do 1.2 seconds, and now we have this cool animation. And I think this 3D perspective that we have here is too low. Okay, so I'm going to set it to 400 pixels. You can set it higher. If you do 2000 pixels, you can see it is not very 3D-ish. Okay, but I think actually this looks better, right? Let's just do 1000. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so this is basically our first animation. This is our first animation. Beautiful. All right, so we can proceed to our second animation. Okay, so to proceed to that, I'm going to comment this out. Yeah, I'm going to comment this whole animation out, and let me actually make the comments. Okay, so that's our first animation. We're going to have our second animation. I want to space this wall as well, so that you don't have a hard time finding different animations. So when you get a source code, you can just comment all the animations that you don't want, okay, and then leave the one that you want. Okay, so that is what you can do. When you get the source code, just comment all the animations that I'm by default going to leave one. Okay, I'm going to leave one for you, but if you don't want that one, you can just comment the ones that you don't want and then leave the one that you want. Okay, all right, so now we don't have the animation again since we commented that out. So let's quickly have a keyframe for the second one. Okay, so our keyframes, and I'm going to call this animation 2. So the end state is going to be you are going to transform again. Okay, so transform, and it's going to rotate on the y-axis this time. Actually, we can just do rotate 0. Okay, and it is going to set everything to 0 on the at the end state. Okay, yeah, so that's going to be the end state, and we're actually going to let's going to grab the li as well. Nav links li. Okay, I'm going to grab that again. Let me have some space here, and initially we are going to let me first have the animation. Okay, so we call that animation 2, and this is going to have a duration of 1 second. The easing function is going to be ease, and the fill mode is going to be forwards. Okay, so we should have the end state that we have for the keyframe. All right, so initially I'm going to transform and rotate on the y-axis. I'm going to rotate 90 degrees, so that's what we have, and I'm going to rotate on the x-axis as well, negative 90 degrees. Okay, so this is how it's going to animate. All right, now I want to set the pivot point, okay, the origin to top right, to the top right. Okay, so that's what we have. You know what, let me make this 90 degrees, 90 degrees instead. Yeah, that looks better. Okay, so let me actually give them an initial opacity of 0, and the end they are going to come back to 1. Okay, so that doesn't look bad. And now I'm going to put different delays on them. Okay, so let's grab the second one. So the reason why I don't have it on the first one, okay, or I don't grab the first one and then put it on it, is by default, since we don't have any delay in this, that means it has a 0 delay. Okay, so we can actually specify 0s for the delay, right? But if you don't have it, then it's by default 0. So that's why the first one I don't target it. Okay, so by default it doesn't delay to animate. Okay, but the second one I want it to take about 300 milliseconds to animate. Okay, so animation delay is going to be 300 milliseconds. That's basically 0.3 seconds. Okay, so as you can see, the second one takes some time before it animates. Okay, I'm going to do same for the rest. So just like we did for the first animation, this very simple. So the fourth one as well, and then the fifth one. Okay, so this is going to be 900, and this is going to be 1.2 seconds, or 1200. Yeah, so that's what we have. And you can actually make this faster. Okay, so the duration you can change, you can change that to, let's say, 300 milliseconds. All right, that doesn't look terrible, but I think that's too fast. Okay, so I'm going to do 600. Let's do 1 second. That wasn't bad. Yeah, you can play around with this. Okay, you can play with this and then see what you can get, or you can end up with. Okay, so that's all for the, actually, you know what, let's change the perspective and see what we get for this. So yeah, here perspective, I'm going to change that to 500 pixels. And I think this looks a little better. Okay, with the higher perspective, or with the lower perspective actually. Okay, so let's leave that at 500 pixels, and let's proceed. You can play around with these values to see what you can end up with. Okay, so that's for our second animation. I'm going to copy this comment and then paste it for the third one. So our third animation, all right, you know what, this is going to be very similar to this one right here. Okay, it's going to be very similar to the second one, so we can just copy that and then uncomment it. Okay, so that is going to be animation 3. That's the name of the keyframe. And yeah, let's change it here as well. Let's see. So initially I want to only have the x-axis. Okay, I'm going to set that to 90 degrees, and everything is going to, okay, so here I want to make it pivot from the top only. Okay, so this is what we have. So you can play around and then see what you end up with. Let's change it to 500 milliseconds or 0.5 seconds is the same thing. Okay, so you can play around with these values and then see what you can end up with. Okay, so very simple, and that's all for I made that 1 second. It looks a little more beautiful. Yeah, that's good. And that's all for our third animation. Let's copy these comments and then paste it for the fourth one. I'm going to comment the third one out, and I think the fourth one is going to be similar, right? I'm not really sure. You know what, let me just copy and then paste it for the fourth one as well. We are just going to change the values around and then see what we can end up with. Okay, so I'm not going to have any transform for the initial value, and let's see. Okay, so the animation itself, that's the keyframe, is going to start, that's for 0%, is going to have a transform, and it's actually going to scale instead. Okay, so we are going to use a different transform property here of scale, and it is going to scale from 1% to at 50%, or in the middle of the animation we want it to scale to 1.1. okay, so 110%. okay, so this 100%, this 110%. okay, and at the end of the animation we want it to scale back to 1%, sorry, 100%. okay, and okay, so this should be 4, and this should be 4, right? What else? Okay, the opacity, we should remove that as well. Okay, so this is what we end up with, which is too slow, so I'm going to do 500 milliseconds. Let's see what we have, and that is a little weird as well. So I'm going to do 300. Okay, no, that doesn't look quite good. Let's see, I want it to have an opacity of 0. okay, let me keep that opacity, and at the end state I want it to be set back to 1. okay, yeah, this doesn't look bad. Let me change this back to, that's the duration. I'm going to change it back to 500 milliseconds. Not too bad. Let's move on to the last one, the last animation. And let me have that comment here. So animation 5. And I think that's going to be basically similar to what we have. So copy, paste, uncomment it, and let's see what we can change around to have a different. So for this, I'm actually going to change the perspective that we have on the nav links. Okay, that's the UL. I'm going to change the perspective to 0, or let me just do none. Okay, it shouldn't be 0, it should be none instead, not 0. Okay, so we shouldn't have any perspective on that. Okay, so we have the animation, we have the keyframe, which I'm going to remove, and let's change this to animation 5. Let's do same here, and this should take, I think 500 milliseconds is good. Okay, let me actually do 1 second so that you see it. Whoa. And I don't think I should have an opacity here. Okay, so yeah. All right, so this actually should be top. Yeah, should be right. Let's just do right. Okay, for the origin or the pivot point. All right, so what we want to do is we are going to transform and rotate on the y-axis. Okay, negative 90 degrees. So initially it is going to start from a negative 90 degrees rotation. Okay, and at the end I'm going to transform it back to rotate of 0. So this is going to make the x-axis, the y-axis, and then the z-axis 0. Okay, so we are just going to affect everything. So this y-axis is going to get back to 0. Okay, and this is what we end up with. Okay, remember we have the delays on these, or the delays on the individual LIs already. That is why they are taking different times to animate in. Okay, so this is how it is going to animate. And the reason why I changed the perspective, or I removed the perspective, is this. Okay, so as you can see, it doesn't look quite good with the perspective. Okay, and I think, let me just paste it and then see how this actually looks at the end. Let's see. As you can see, it still doesn't even look better than what we had before. Okay, so I'm going to set the opacity back to none, and let's keep this. Okay, so this is the final result. All right, so that's all, guys. That's our last animation, and that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.